Welcome to episode 63, and we're going to revisit shotgun microphones in this one. Now, we looked at them before and we had a listen to what they sounded like in the studio here, but also in the office. And the differences between them seem to be tonally either quite extreme. One of them sounded, I don't think, particularly nice at all, but the other ones sounded pretty much of a muchness. And I had an email asking, was there a reason for this, and why is it that certain microphones appear to be very popular? The Sennheiser 416 is a good example of a shotgun microphone that appears to be on everyone's go-to list. So we've got people who love Shure SM7Bs, RE20s, we've got the U87 people, we've got the 414 people like me. And if you're doing broadcast stuff and you want a shotgun microphone, the chances are you just go straight for a 416. And it's quite an obvious microphone to actually isolate in terms of what it looks like, and you can spot them fairly easily because they're the only one I've ever seen that's got that sort of curve on the very front of the grill. So 416s are quite visible in the same way some of the other microphones are. But the snag is, why? I mean, why is a 416? Tonally, it's a fairly neutral microphone. If you point them at people and you record them, it's okay. Some people like to use them for voiceovers. Other people just use them inside the Zeppelin windshields with the hairy sausages on the outside. You can use them outside with cameras. Why? Lots of microphones sound quite like this. So what's the point? I mean, why are people going to this one? I've collected a few together. So they range from things like this, which is an Audio Technica AT875. It's quite a short one. And the most popular use of these things is sticking them on top of a camera. Very often a smallish camera, so a DSLR or something like that. People think, the little internal microphones are a bit rubbish, so they're going to put something nice on. So this is marketed as a shotgun, but it's really small. Realistically, the actual condenser element is round about there, about halfway down. So the interference tube design is really short. So the reality is that I think most people know that these things are more hypercardioid than they are shotgun in terms of pattern. They're directional, but of course, a cardioid is directional to a degree, isn't it? It just doesn't pick up particularly well at the back, but it does at the front. So how does something like that go against the others? If you want a more directional approach, and being honest, that's what I did 20 odd years ago. And I bought one of these things. It's an Audio Technica. It's an 815. Oddly, that is also an Audio Technica 815, although of a different vintage. And the benefit of these things, for me, at the time I bought it, was quite simple. You could open it up and you could stick a battery in. So at the time I bought this one, I was using portable equipment that didn't have phantom power. So something that actually opened up and you could screw a battery in was a pretty useful tool. So these 815s I quite liked. And certainly from the point of view of being a directional microphone, they did a pretty good job, I thought. They're a bit brighter sounding maybe, but I quite liked this over the 416. Trouble was, back then I couldn't actually afford a 416, so did that colour my judgment a bit? I mean, I always used to justify it by saying, well, of course it's longer, it's a bit more directional. I don't know if that was true or not. So my task, I thought, for this video was to try and figure some sort of comparison we could do with these four microphones. The fourth one, that one. Now, that's enormous. I mean, look at the 416. It's hardly the same thing, is it? But this is an AKG CK9, and it actually has an AKG 451 microphone screwed into the end of it. So that's an enormous mic, and they're very directional. At least that's what I've always thought. never bothered to try it out. In practice, it always seemed to be directional. So our range of microphones goes from sort of vaguely shotgun to extremely shotgun. So how can I compare them? Well, what I've done is feed some pink noise into one of the loudspeakers here, and then my test conditions are going to be quite simple. I'm going to mount all 4 of these microphones next to each other so I can swivel the whole array around. Now, my thoughts are, if I point this directly at the loudspeaker, I can measure the output, look at the meters, and record the level that this microphone gets pointing directly at the loudspeaker. Then I can rotate it, do another measurement, rotate it a bit more, until at the end I'm 180 degrees away from where I started, and the pink noise coming from that loudspeaker is going into the back of the microphone. And if I record every single output level at all of those rotational differences from straight on to 180 degrees away, I could plot them on a graph. And if I do that for every microphone, then what I've actually got is a sort of polar response guide, isn't it? I mean, you often see those published with the, the circle with the line going around it where the response is. So then I thought what I'll do as well is I'll do the same test at lots of different frequencies. So I'll filter the pink noise, and I actually picked sort of top end. So basically I put a shelf in and it starts to tail off about 12k, something like that, and then pretty much we've got that top end sufficiently going up that I can't hear it because I'm getting old and my hearing tails off at about 14k now. So realistically we're going to do a recording of the very top, then we'll put the filter a bit lower and we'll go down, do the same rotation and recording, then we'll go down in frequency and right down to the bottom, and I think I've chosen 63 Hertz as a filter value at the bottom, so we'll actually hear what the response is like to bass. And in the middle I've got a 1k and a 4k band. They're sort of top and bottom-ish of speech frequencies, and just for completeness I've got an 8k one at the top. Maybe when we look at the response curves that I'm going to generate, we'll be able to draw some conclusions over how these microphones all differ. Be interested to see what the result is, and like all our tests, I don't know what the answers are when I'm recording this, so that's going to be our test conditions. We'll do the test and then we'll have some conclusions at the end. So off we go on our first test. Well, that was quite interesting. I think I've come to a few conclusions. The 416, which is a lot of people's go-to shotgun microphone, in actual fact doesn't have remotely the reach that I thought it had. So it's not ultra directional at all. It's moderately directional, and certainly once you get down in frequency, the amount you swivel left to right before the volume starts to disappear is quite high. I think this might be the most popular microphone because not it gives you that reach, but because the tail off as you get off axis is quite gentle. So it's going to be more forgiving about aiming. Now, as we sort of move it round in a circle like that, pointing at the camera here, that won't make any difference at all to what it sounds like. It's only once we get to sort of beyond 45 degrees that it starts to drop. Now, that's pretty much the same for the high frequencies, the mid frequencies and the low frequencies. It is directional, but it's gentle. At the very top, it's the most directional, of course, but most of our sort of wanted stuff is in that middle chunk. And on the middle chunk, we've got some decent amount of leeway. The least shotgun of all the microphones is this Audio Technica. Now, the 875 as a video mic performs like a slightly narrower cardioid. So you could stick it on your DSLR and it will pick up everything the lens can see, even on wide. Its performance is sufficiently wide that it's a good microphone for general capture, but it just doesn't have the ability to get in a bit further because that narrowness is just not there. Once we get to the longer shotguns, we've got definite reach. We can get a bit closer in with this microphone at the very top, and also on the sort of medium frequencies. It drops off quite steeply. The actual curve on some of those graphs shows that a little bit of movement is going to give you a lot of gain reduction. So as you move off axis, it starts to drop. It seems to behave quite oddly at bass, and I wasn't aware of that. I suppose over the years I've just treated that as sort of just how it was. But I hadn't realised that at the very low frequencies it falls off very, very quickly. And that was a bit of a surprise. But it also perhaps explains why they sound like they do. And perhaps why I like it for voice. But it does need aiming. I used to use these when I worked in a college. And when we were sort of training people in things like microphone capture for interviews and stuff like that. This was quite a difficult one because very often when this was inside a windshield on the end of a boom, it was quite heavy, and very often the students would let it droop, and that does explain why the sound sounded like it did. That drop off is very evident looking at the charts. The really long one is, well, it just behaves very strangely. It's ultra directional at higher frequencies. It's still quite directional at the middle ones. And once we get round between, say, 45 and 90, it drops off quite sharply. It does that across the board down to the mid-range. And then it does odd things. It has got bass response, this particular microphone. But that bass response seems to change very little between, well, in between the 45 and the 90 degree angle. But once you get round to 90 in there, I mean, it makes no difference. And it has got a very strange little hump in the frequency response that I hadn't noticed before. So I think I've convinced myself that the reason the 416 is popular is just because it sounds nice and its balance of directionality and wide-angleness, if I can put it like that, is balanced. As we move off mic, the change is relatively gentle. So it's not actually a brilliant microphone. It doesn't give you the ability to get in as close as people think, me included. It's just a very well designed microphone, and it's sort of quite neutral in how it treats it. Some of the other ones have got quite pronounced differences in tone as we move off axis. Looking at the graphs, quite a few of them seem to track together. They might start at the same point, they might finish at the same point, and then spread out a little bit in between, which does explain why these things sound different. We can't really look at a normal frequency response curve for these microphones, and that's what we're normally presented with. You need something a bit more detailed to work out what it actually is they're doing, and the vast majority are quite usable in the speech frequencies. It's going to be very strange to use these for music, and I have used shotguns a few times when I wasn't able to get a microphone close enough to an orchestra and I wanted to pick out a soloist, and I used one of these, and I was never really very pleased with the results. And I think the problem is that while it may well have been directional at what I was pointing at, and so maybe if it was that single piccolo player in the middle of a row of people, I could highlight the piccolo because it's up the top. That microphone also collected everything else around, which would, I think, explain why the sound it added to the overall effect just wasn't as good. Shoving that fader may well have given me the piccolo player, but it muddied the whole thing up. So I was never very impressed with that, and I think this little test has explained that a little bit better. And I certainly understand a little bit more about how these things are working now. So I hope this has been useful. It's a bit of an unusual one, having to conjure up a test and then doing the results blind, but I think the results were a little bit different from what I actually expected. Anyway, that was episode 63. If you've enjoyed it, give it a like. Do the subscribe thing if you haven't, because I've noticed quite a few people don't bother to subscribe, but they watch. So have a subscribe, and then you'll get the notifications when I do another video. It's been quite interesting. It's actually been quite fun. It's taken me a long time to do as well. The measurement side of things really took time. So it's measurements, Excel spreadsheets. Ooh, that's not musical, is it? Anyway, see you on the next one. Take care.